Hey, welcome to this Unicorn Studio tutorial. Today we're going to learn how to make this cool Huly beam effect that I teased on the Twitter a couple days ago. And I know there already is one in the starter templates, but a couple of new effects have come out and just came up with some more interesting ideas how to make it look better. So I'm going to also update the template. So let's get into it. There's going to be a couple pieces to this. We're going to have two different files. The reason being we're actually going to use a texture for the fine details here in the laser itself. So we're going to create that texture separately in Unicorn Studio and then import it into our scene. So let's dive in. And you know what? We're actually going to start with that texture. This is kind of an underrated thing in Unicorn Studio, given that you can do a whole lot with textures and blend modes as well as displacement to create some, I would say, more organic, more unique looking treatments. For this one, I'm just going to use noise. Noise fill just uses two colors and interpolates them with a cool chroma effect that adds some intermediate color blending that makes it look super nice. But for this, I'm just going to use straight up black and white, and because I want to have a lot of detail in that texture, I'm going to kick it all the way up to 2000 scale. So you can see we have this organic looking texture here, and I can browse between my different noise functions here per lin. And then I have my effects like skew and playing with the angle. So I think for this, we want to have something that is vertical. You know, looks like it would be a cool background to have all that light flowing down. So I think this looks pretty good. I think this is what I used before. And I can play with the phase of the noise here, so I get the color distribution the way that I want. I think that looks pretty good. I also had some FBM on there, fractal Brownian motion. It's another noise effect, and this does some distortion offsetting of the underlying texture. Like that creates a cool kind of fractal marbled effect. But I want it to just be very subtle, just slightly, so that we don't have kind of those perfect vertical lines. Something like that, and maybe even more scale, so the frequency of that is higher. Yeah, I don't know if that's too much. That looks pretty good. And then we're also going to bake in the little sparkles that we see in the beam as the kind of general flow of that material is going down. And the reason I'm baking into the texture is then we don't need to procedurally generate it in the scene itself. This is kind of a performance optimization and just being smart about how you compose your layers and how you get the final effect that you want. The more layers we do at runtime dynamically, the more expensive the scene is, the more draw calls there are. And generally we want it to be as tight and efficient as possible. You know, if your scene has 40 layers and all of them are animated and they have child effects, it's going to be really slow and laggy. There's only so much optimization that can be done at runtime. So a lot of being really good at Unicorn Studio is just being clever about how you build your scene. This is the same thing just for writing shaders yourself, generally. Being efficient and clever with how you design the final effect. Just using my wisps here. This is like a little star field effect using the add blend mode. I think because I want them to stand out, have little like very clear bright spots. And actually, to make them more noticeable, I might even kick my noise down from going from black to white, making it going from black to gray, just so that the little wisps can be more crisp here and stand out more. So I think this is pretty good. Let's just play with this a little bit more. I'm going to knock that down. Okay, so we can try this. I'm going to export it as a WebP at 1x. And I'm going to use 10% quality because I want my image textures and just images generally to be small. Just like you would in designing a web page, you want to compress your assets, make them efficient. Okay, so this is the second project where we're actually going to build the laser effect. And the first thing we're going to put on the canvas is the beam. I'm going to use point. We have all these different glowing beam options here with this effect. Point has it's basically just like a circle, looks like a sun, but it's got a skew effect. And if I skew it all the way, it becomes a vertical line, kind of like a lightsaber looking effect there. So I'm going to make that vertical. I'm going to scale it down. It also has this thickness, kind of lets me control the glow a little bit. I'm going to bump this color up to make it more of a blue. Lower the thickness. Maybe like this. We'll play with this later. We want to make sure that all of our stuff overlays nicely with this underlying color here. This one's going to be all about blend modes, and we'll see that happening next. So I think we can go ahead and add our new texture. All right, here's the texture in my scene. What do I want to do? I'm going to switch the width and the height to relative. That means when I scale my browser screen, it'll scale relative to the height and width. So that way I know it's always going to kind of fit the way that I want. We're going to want it to go all the way from the top to the bottom. And again, now I know it'll always cover at least the vertical screen space. And, just kick it out, get out wide. I mean, we also have this fit to artboard feature, but I'm not going to use that. And you'll see why in a second, because I actually want to animate the position of this image. But before we do that, I'll just give you a sense of, what we're going to do with this thing. Right there, overlay, you can kind of see what we're going for. We're going to play with the blend modes a little bit more in a second. But let's get this thing animating. I'm going to use projection. And actually, projection is an effect that kind of simulates an environment, three-dimensional environment. You can sort of see how that's working under there. But I like to use projection just to animate or move images or other things that are kind of static. If I want to repeat text, I can do that. And I'm going to repeat it vertically because we're going to animate the texture vertically. And we actually control the directional speed with this XY. So now when I click play, you can see that we are animating this texture. Looks pretty good. Turn off the warp. You don't need to skew it. Then the next thing I'm going to do is just to give it some more of like a dynamic look. Like this just looks like a static image is moving down the page. I want to add some real-time noise to just interact with that texture. It's going to make it come to life. Here it is. I'm going to kick it up to, remember the other one we used like 2000. I'm going to try 1500. Again, I'm going to go black and white. We don't really need color because I'm going to use the blend mode. And, this is really just going to be about playing around with it, experimenting. Noise fill has this drift parameter in the animation section where we can decide, how it moves, and drift makes it move directionally. So I'm going to make it move a little slower. And now let's use the blend mode just to make it interact with our background. Yeah, and this is just really about, figuring out what looks good here. Probably want to skew the noise like we did with our texture. And let me just see what's good here. Kind of like Perlin. Yeah. Okay, let's just try some of these again. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of these are, very nuanced in terms of the effect that you get. So it's really about just experimenting, trial and error. I'm going to just go with something directionally right for now. Just darken seems to do it. And we'll continue with the scene, and we can play with all this stuff as we go. But really, the key cool thing here is the stretch. This was an old effect, but I reworked it so that it had not just the one directional, but it stretched both ways. So you can make this effect actually look like how we want. And of course, we have the choice of all of these easing functions. I'm going to turn off the X stretch because that makes it reverse back up. But yeah, and then from here we can play with it. Here we get a nice wide base. I'm just going to make sure that I don't like any other ones. Actually, I think I like exponent the best, exponential. So that really fans the laser out as if it's hitting something flat and it's just sort of spilling outwards. That looks pretty good. Optional also could just put another beam like this one if we wanted on the bottom to kind of just brighten up this area. Add some more light intensity to the bottom. Yeah, for that, I'm just going to skew this one. And yeah. Next up, we want to add that atmospheric fog effect. And before, I think it was like a separate FBM over some texture. I don't know. It was a little roundabout. But now we have exactly the right effect for this in fog. Fog by default kind of obstructs the background as like real fog would. But we actually want to use this more as like an organic bloom effect. But in order to accomplish that, we can just use our blend mode screen, and we can kick up some luminance, which is just sort of generally the brightness of the fog effect. And I'll animate it so we can see it in action. Yeah, so now it looks like the beam is very brightly shining through some atmosphere here. And we have some other parameters like turbulence, which is just the amount of white space and clumping, if you will. Diffusion is just the amount of blur generally we have. And density is just how much fog there is. So I think kind of generally down the middle, like just a pretty 50-50 values for everything looks good. Chromatic dispersion can give it some extra interesting color too. All right. This is looking pretty good. And then, if you want, you can go back here and just, go crazy with trying different stuff and changing this up, and then replacing it. Maybe you want to skew these a little bit. I kind of think they look nice just as dots. But really, it's just about tweaking and playing to get the effect looking right. Like I said, a lot about just trying different blend modes and for this, looks like we're not centered here. Okay, looks like our projection is not centered. Helpful. Right. So then You can see here I put effects on top of the image. That kind of like makes this a contained unit of these effects. Call that child effects. You can do that for images, text, and shapes as well. And when you do that, you can use the parent layer, in this case the image. You have access to all the same parameters that you would otherwise, but it just has the final result with the effects stacked on top of it. That looks pretty nice. This overlay. That looks nice. Cool. What's the best? Overlay? Overlay. All right, so next we can add some event-based animations. For instance, I'm going to click on Beam. I'm going to click on the Events tab here, and I'm going to click on plus next to Appear. This is going to let me control any of the Beam parameters when the page or the scene loads. So I'm going to use the scale parameter. I'm going to start it at 0%. I'm going to end it at what it was already set to at 16. And I'm going to wait 1 second. All right. And you can see after I've added my appear event that the timeline shows up here. I'm going to do the same for this one too, just so that they show up at the same time. 0, 1 second. Yep. All right. And I think one little finishing touch that would be fun. One more beam. I'm going to use this. I'm going to boost the thickness so there isn't so much fall off. Skew it out just a little bit. And I'm going to drop it underneath all this stuff. And I think it would be cool to have like a little pulsing, flickering thing looping down the beam. Let's get the color right first. Okay, I'm going to start it at minus, let's see, which is 0. Okay, minus 25, be minus 30, just so that it's out of the frame. I'm going to go to events, click appear, position, you can see minus 30. I'm going to put 130 here. So I expect that it's going to go from top to bottom. Okay, that was pretty fast. That's all right, 2,500. And we're going to just start it along with everything else. Nice. Okay. And then the second thing I'm going to do is I want it to flicker, like to look really electric and active. So I'm going to modulate the scale between 18 and 24 by using the loop setting. And I'm going to make it like a very short duration. So that means with this easing curve, it's going to modulate between 18 and 24% scale. So you can kind of see that that modulation looks like, you know, some electrical activity. I actually want to loop this as well. And then my loop delay is just like we can wait every 3 seconds, then we'll start the animation again. So that this beam, this like loop thingy, pulse thing, you know, whatever I want to call it, is going to show up every 3 seconds. There we can see it. Maybe this even even more. 16, 24, even faster. Nice. Okay. All right. Let's take that down. So I'm going to hit the embed tab, publish, and open up optimize. And just briefly talk about the scene itself. So if we want to put this on a web page, we need to be aware of performance, of course. A lot of people will say, looks cool, how does it perform? Is this going to make my site lag? And the answer is, like I was saying earlier, yes, if you don't pay attention to it or you don't try to make adjustments. So luckily we have the optimization studio that lets us try all kinds of different things, kind of play with our events that are on the page, and just get a sense of how this might look on your site. But here we're going to talk about performance, and the biggest controls we have, or the simplest ones at least, are scale, DPI, and frames per second. Scale is the output canvas. It's going to like really just, as you can see, downsample everything. DPI is resolution, so kind of similar. Honestly, I don't really know the difference. I think you have to just play with it and look at the effects and see what the balance of savings are and quality. But what I like to do is to use the selective layer downsampling. So just looking here, if you see that the layer has a purple dot, that means that it's rendering at runtime. So each frame, it's rendering every single one of these effects with the dot. That's how we calculate these draws per frame. So obviously we want to keep those to be as minimal as possible, but we also want to be able to run the scene that we want to run. Given that, we still have some controls over the resolution that each individual layer runs at. And if I go from 1 to 0.5, it's actually a quarter of the pixels being run through that effect every frame. So we get big savings just from going from 1 to 0.5. And I can do that all the way down the line here until I hit the last one. If I want the last, like the fog, for instance, is the top effect. If I want that to be at full resolution, because maybe it has some details, like maybe you have an ASCII effect that needs to be crisp, you can still get away with downsampling everything underneath of it. But here everything kind of should be rendering it at the same amount, same resolution, I should say. So I'm just going to stick it all back, and we are going to see if we can just get to 1 DPI. And, I'm looking at it. I think that looks completely fine. And it's saved us probably half the memory that the 1.5 DPI scene has. I can still be strategic about what else I downsample, like this noise fill. There's no need for that to be at full res. Yeah, so I think 1 DPI is maybe all I need to make this thing run. You gotta hit save, but then you can go back and embed as you would, and you're off to the races with your optimized scene. Okay, actually I got a couple finishing touches that really improve the overall look and quality of this scene. And they're all to do with blend modes and a little bit of ordering. The first thing I'm gonna do is, I forgot to move this beam down below, because before it didn't have the texture overlay, but now it does. Looks a little better there. But I found that with these two blend modes, this thing looked a lot cooler. And what I did was, on top of the image, I used linear burn for the noise. And then for the image, on top of the beam, I used color dodge. Can't tell you exactly what those are, what they do, but it just makes the whole, all the details look much crisper. And, you know, we have a little too much glow now from this beam, so I'm gonna knock it back to 10. And when we scale it in, I'm gonna knock it back to 10. But, yeah, I just played with it a little bit more, and it's just much more crisp and has just the details are looking so much better now. All right. Think I'm pretty happy with this. I encourage you to go and have fun and play around. Try some different colors and different textures, and yeah, go nuts. Thanks for watching. Hope you learned something, and happy unicorning.